Pharrell Williams walked into the music theory and mathematics class at a prestigious university. The room was packed with students eager to learn, but none of them expected what was about. Once again, he took the chalk and began to work through the steps. This time, though, it wasn't as quick as the previous problems. Pharrell paused a few times, thinking carefully about his next move. The tension in the room grew. Everyone was on the edge of their seats, waiting to see if he could solve this impossible problem. Minutes passed, and Pharrell continued to work. The room was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Dr. Martinez watched intently, his frustration turning to disbelief. Could Pharrell Williams really be solving this problem? Would the professor's plan to humiliate him backfire in front of the entire class? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Pharrell stepped back from the board. He had finished the equation. The students were stunned. There, in front of them, was the correct answer to one of the hardest mathematical problems they had ever seen applied to music theory. Dr. Martinez was speechless. He had no choice but to admit that Pharrell Williams wasn't just a genius in music production, he was a genius in mathematics too. But how could this be possible? Dr. Martinez stood frozen in disbelief. His carefully crafted plan had completely fallen apart. He had set out to humiliate Pharrell Williams, to prove that commercial producers like him didn't deserve their fame and fortune without classical training. But the opposite had happened. Pharrell had just solved one of the most complex mathematical problems related to music theory in front of an entire class of students without breaking a sweat. The students exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. They couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Pharrell Williams, the man they knew for his incredible musical production and innovative sounds, was also a mathematical genius. Some of them even began to question if Dr. Martinez had underestimated Williams from the start. Pharrell, however, remained humble. He simply returned the chalk to the professor and took his seat as if solving the equation had been no big deal. But the students couldn't let it go. One of them, a curious young man, raised his hand. "Mr. Williams, how do you know all of this? I mean, you're not a professor or a mathematician. How did you learn these mathematical concepts so well?" Pharrell smiled and leaned back in his chair. "I studied it when I was younger," he said simply. "Mathematics has always been important to me, especially in music production and sound engineering. If you want to understand how sound works, how to create perfect harmonies, how to innovate with new sounds, you need to understand the math behind it all." The students were captivated. They had never thought of mathematics as something that could open doors to musical creativity and innovation. But hearing it from Pharrell Williams made them think differently. Some of them began to see mathematical concepts not as dry subjects, but as keys to unlocking the mysteries of sound and music. Dr. Martinez, still reeling from the shock, tried to regain control of the situation. "Well, Mr. Williams," he said, his voice tight with frustration, "that's impressive, but there's more to teaching than just solving problems. Education is about understanding, not just memorizing formulas." Pharrell nodded, agreeing with the professor. "You're right, but understanding starts with curiosity. If you're curious enough, you'll figure things out. It's not about memorizing, it's about wanting to know how things work, how sounds interact, how mathematics can help you create something beautiful." The class was silent again, but this time it was different. The students weren't watching a competition anymore. They were listening to someone who had achieved incredible things in life, someone who was offering them a different perspective on learning. Dr. Martinez, however, wasn't ready to admit defeat just yet. He cleared his throat and turned back to the board, writing out another complex equation involving digital signal processing mathematics. "Let's see if you can explain this one, Mr. Williams," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The professor hoped that Pharrell wouldn't just solve the problem, but that he'd struggle to explain it to the class. Surely Pharrell wasn't capable of breaking it down the way a trained teacher could, at least. That's what Dr. Martinez hoped. Pharrell stood up again, walking back to the board. The students were now fully engaged, eager to see what would happen next. Pharrell didn't just dive into solving the equation this time. Instead, he turned to the class and started explaining the basic principles behind the problem. At its core, Pharrell began, mathematical concepts in music are about relationships. They're about how different frequencies interact, how they create harmony or dissonance, how they move through space and time. If you can understand these relationships, you can apply them to almost anything, whether you're producing a hip-hop track, designing a concert hall, or just trying to understand why certain melodies make you feel a certain way. The students were hanging on his every word. Pharrell's explanation was simple. but it made the complex topic of mathematical music theory feel approachable. He wasn't using fancy jargon or complicated terminology. He was speaking in a way that everyone could understand. Dr. Martinez, meanwhile, was starting to sweat. He had thought that Pharrell would stumble when it came to teaching. But Pharrell was not only solving the problems, he was teaching the class in a way that was engaging and insightful. The professor had been trying to humiliate Williams, but now it seemed like Pharrell was giving the class a lesson they would never forget. As Pharrell continued to explain the equation, he drew connections to real-world examples, showing the students how mathematical principles could be used in music production, sound design, and even in everyday listening experiences. The students were enthralled. They had never thought of math in this way before. To unfold, Pharrell was there as a guest to observe, but the traditional music theory professor Dr. Martinez had other plans in mind. Dr. Martinez was known for his strong opinions and was not too fond of commercial music producers like Pharrell Williams. He believed that people like Pharrell were just lucky, born into talent, and didn't deserve the respect they had in the music world without proper classical training. As Pharrell took his seat at the back, trying to blend in with the students, Dr. Martinez noticed him immediately. Pharrell Williams walked into the music theory and mathematics class at a prestigious university. The room was packed with students eager to learn, but none of them expected what was about to unfold. Pharrell was there as a guest to observe, but the traditional music theory professor Dr. Martinez had other plans in mind. Dr. Martinez was known for his strong opinions and was not too fond of commercial music producers like Pharrell Williams. He believed that people like Pharrell were just lucky, born into talent, and didn't deserve the respect they had in the music world without proper classical training. As Pharrell took his seat at the back, trying to blend in with the students, Dr. Martinez noticed him immediately. A smirk appeared on the professor's face. He saw this as the perfect opportunity to show everyone that Pharrell Williams, the famous producer, was just an ordinary person when it came to real musical knowledge, especially in something as complex as the mathematical foundations of music theory. The professor's eyes gleamed with mischief as he approached the board. "Today, class," he began, "we're going to dive into some extremely challenging problems involving frequency ratios, harmonic series calculations, and acoustic mathematics. And since we have a special guest with us, someone who's supposed to be a musical genius, why don't we see if he can handle it?" The entire room fell silent. All eyes turned toward Pharrell. The students were shocked that the professor was calling out someone as important as Williams. Whispers filled the room. Some students were excited to see how this would play out, while others were nervous for Pharrell. Pharrell, however, remained calm. He simply smiled and nodded, indicating he was up for the challenge. But deep down, the students were wondering, was Pharrell Williams really a mathematical genius, or was he about to be humiliated in front of the entire class? Dr. Martinez started writing a series of complex equations on the board involving wave frequencies, harmonic overtones, and mathematical ratios that govern musical intervals. These were not your average music theory problems. They were the kind that only the most advanced students could solve, requiring deep understanding of both mathematics and acoustics. The professor turned to Pharrell with a sly grin. "Care to give it a try, Mr. Williams?" he asked, mocking the producer's intelligence. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone waited in anticipation to see how Pharrell would respond. Would he admit defeat, or was he about to surprise everyone? Pharrell Williams stood up slowly, making his way to the front of the room. The students watched his every move. He looked calm, but they couldn't help but wonder if he was nervous on the inside. Dr. Martinez handed him a piece of chalk, confident that Pharrell would stumble over the problem. Pharrell stared at the board for a moment, studying the equation in front of him. It was a tough one, a complex calculation involving the mathematical relationship between different frequencies and a chord progression. Dr. Martinez had chosen this equation on purpose, hoping to prove that Pharrell was out of his league when it came to serious academic work. The professor crossed his arms, ready to watch Pharrell struggle, but Pharrell didn't seem fazed. After just a few moments of looking at the problem, he started to write. The chalk moved swiftly across the board as Pharrell worked through the steps of the equation with ease. The students were in awe. They had expected Pharrell to at least hesitate or make a mistake, but he solved the problem as if it were second nature to him. Even Dr. Martinez seemed taken aback, though he quickly hid his surprise. "Well," the professor said, trying to maintain his composure, "that was just the first one. Let's see if you can handle the next." He erased the equation and wrote a new one. this time even more complicated, involving complex logarithmic calculations for decibel measurements and frequency modulation. Once again, Pharrell took the chalk and, without a second thought, began solving the equation. The room was completely silent. The students leaned forward in their seats, trying to understand what was happening. Was Pharrell Williams really solving these difficult problems without any help? Could it be that the man they all thought of as just a music producer was actually a mathematical genius? The professor was growing frustrated. His plan to humiliate Pharrell wasn't going the way he had expected, but he wasn't ready to give up just yet. Dr. Martinez was starting to lose his patience. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Pharrell Williams, the Grammy-winning producer and entrepreneur, was solving each problem with incredible speed and accuracy. This wasn't supposed to happen. The professor had set up these problems to make Pharrell look like a fool, but instead, it seemed like Pharrell was the one showing everyone up. Dr. Martinez decided to take things up a notch. He wrote down an equation that was so complex even some of the brightest students in the room wouldn't have been able to solve it without significant effort. It involved advanced calculus applied to acoustic wave interference patterns, something that required years of practice and deep knowledge of both mathematics and physics. The students gasped when they saw the problem. They exchanged nervous glances, wondering if Pharrell would finally be stumped. But Pharrell simply nodded, as if to say challenge accepted. By the time Pharrell finished, the room was buzzing with excitement. The students were inspired. They realized that learning wasn't just about passing exams or getting grades. It was about understanding the world around them, including the mathematical beauty hidden in music. Dr. Martinez, however, was still struggling to come to terms with what had happened. He had tried to show Pharrell Williams as a fraud, but instead, he had revealed Pharrell to be more brilliant than anyone had expected. Dr. Martinez was visibly shaken. His plan had failed spectacularly. Not only had Pharrell Williams solved the impossible equations, but he had also captivated the entire class with his explanations. The professor had underestimated him completely. The class was now fully on Pharrell's side. Students were asking him questions, eager to learn more from someone who had achieved so much in both music and mathematical applications. Dr. Martinez stood at the front of the room, unsure of what to do next. His authority had been challenged, and he wasn't sure how to regain control. Finally, the professor took a deep breath and spoke. "Mr. Williams," he said, his voice softer than before, "I have to admit, I didn't expect this. I thought you were just a music producer, someone who got lucky with hits. But clearly, I was wrong." Pharrell smiled but said nothing. He didn't need to. The class already knew the truth. Dr. Martinez continued, "I can see now that you understand mathematics on a deep level. You've not only solved these problems, but you've shown us how important mathematical thinking is in creative fields. I may have misjudged you." There was a moment of silence. The students were shocked to see their professor admit he was wrong, but they could also see the respect growing between Dr. Martinez and Pharrell Williams. Pharrell finally spoke. "It's okay, Professor," he said kindly. "I get it. A lot of people think that music production and mathematics don't go together, but in my experience, they're connected in ways most people don't realize." By the end of the class, everyone had learned something valuable. The students had seen firsthand that Pharrell Williams wasn't just a music producer. He was a brilliant mind who understood the importance of mathematical thinking in creative work. Dr. Martinez, though initially trying to prove a point, had come to respect Pharrell's intelligence and humility. He realized that even someone as successful as Pharrell could be passionate about learning and teaching. As the class ended, students gathered around Pharrell, asking him more questions about his life, his work, and his thoughts on education. Dr. Martinez watched from a distance, reflecting on the day's events. He had started the day with the intention of humiliating Pharrell Williams, but in the end, it was he who had learned the most. Pharrell Williams left the classroom that day not as a celebrity producer, but as a teacher who had inspired a new generation of thinkers. The students would never forget the lesson they had learned, that real genius comes not from fame or wealth, but from a genuine passion for understanding the world and sharing that knowledge with others. And as for Dr. Martinez, he would never again underestimate anyone, no matter how famous or successful they were. The experience had humbled him, and he too had learned that there's always more to a person than what meets the eye. As the students continued to crowd around Pharrell, asking him questions about his life, Dr. Martinez stood at the back of the room, deep in thought. The entire class had shifted in ways he had never anticipated. He had walked into the room that morning with the intention of proving a point that Pharrell Williams, despite his fame and success, was out of his depth in an academic setting. But now, standing there watching Williams engage with the students, he realized just how wrong he had been. The professor's pride had clouded his judgment. He had assumed that success in the music industry was incompatible with the intellectual rigor required in academia. But Pharrell had shown him, and everyone in the room, that the two could coexist. In fact, they were intertwined. As Pharrell spoke to the students, his passion for learning was evident. He wasn't just answering their questions, he was inspiring them. He talked about his early experiments with sound, how he had been curious about the mathematical relationships in music from a young age. He told them that his love for mathematics and science wasn't just a tool for creating hit songs, it was a way of thinking, a way of solving problems and pushing the boundaries of what was possible in music. One student raised her hand shyly. "Mr. Williams," she asked, "do you think someone like me, who's not very good at math, could ever do something creative like what you do?" The room was silent as the students absorbed his words. They had expected Pharrell Williams, the Grammy winner, the music mogul, to be distant, maybe even arrogant, but the man standing in front of them was humble, approachable, and eager to share his knowledge. Dr. Martinez felt a pang of regret. He had spent so much of his career judging people based on their academic credentials and their ability to fit into his definition of intelligence. But here was Pharrell Williams, someone who didn't fit into any of those boxes, yet was achieving things that most academics could only dream of. The students began to file out of the classroom, still buzzing with excitement. Some stayed behind, hoping to catch a few more words with Pharrell before he left. Dr. Martinez hesitated for a moment, then made his way toward Williams. "Mr. Williams," he began, his voice soft, almost unsure, "I owe you an apology." Pharrell looked at him, surprised. "For what?" "For underestimating you," Dr. Martinez admitted. "I thought you were just another music producer who made it big. I didn't realize the depth of your knowledge or your passion for learning. I've been teaching for decades, but today I think I've learned more from you than I've taught in a long time." Pharrell's expression softened. "No need to apologize, Professor. We all have something to learn from each other. I've made plenty of mistakes in my life, and I'll keep making more. But what's important is that we keep learning, keep growing." Dr. Martinez nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. He realized now that his initial judgment of Pharrell had been rooted in his own insecurities. He had spent so much time building up his authority as a professor that he had forgotten the true purpose of education: to inspire, to challenge, and to push the boundaries of what people thought was possible. Pharrell extended his hand, and Dr. Martinez shook it, feeling a sense of mutual respect growing between them. "Thank you," the professor said quietly, "for showing me that there's always more to learn." As Pharrell gathered his things and prepared to leave, he turned back to Dr. Martinez with a parting thought. "Remember, Professor," he said, "the best teachers aren't the ones who have all the answers, they're the ones who know how to ask the right questions." With that, Pharrell Williams walked out of the classroom, leaving behind a group of students whose perspectives had been forever changed. Dr. Martinez stood at the front of the empty room, reflecting on the day's events. He had started the day trying to prove a point, but in the end, it was Pharrell Williams who had taught him the most valuable lesson of all. The lesson wasn't about mathematics or music theory, or even about creative industries. It was about humility. It was about the willingness to admit when you've been wrong and the openness to learn from others, no matter who they are or where they come from. As Dr. Martinez turned off the lights and left the classroom, he knew that he too would never forget what he had learned that day. It was a lesson that went beyond textbooks and equations, a lesson about the true meaning of intelligence, curiosity, and growth. And in that quiet moment, as the classroom doors closed behind him, Dr. Martinez realized that he had just experienced one of the most profound moments of his teaching career. The worlds of academia, music, and education had collided in ways he had never imagined, and he was grateful for it. Because sometimes, the most valuable lessons come from the most unexpected places. Pharrell smiled warmly at her. "Absolutely," he said without hesitation. "Mathematics isn't about being the smartest person in the room, it's about persistence. It's about curiosity. If you're willing to put in the time and ask the right questions, you can learn anything. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you what you're not capable of."